Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you're having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people's story. About 8 months ago, I finally achieved one of my biggest life goals. After years of saving every penny from my software development job, I bought a small 8-unit apartment building. It's nothing fancy, just a well-maintained brick building from the 1920s with some real character. The best feature is definitely the shared rooftop patio with an amazing view of the downtown skyline. I decided to live in one of the units myself. Partly to save money, but mostly because I wanted to keep a close eye on my investment. I work from home anyway, so it made perfect sense. Plus, being on site means I can handle maintenance issues quickly and get to know my tenants. The building has this weird quirk where there's technically an HOA that was set up years ago when the previous owner tried to convert the units into condos. That never happened, but the HOA stayed in place to manage the common areas like the hallways, laundry room, and rooftop patio. It's a simple 3-person board, and honestly, it runs pretty smoothly for the most part. Most of my tenants are great. Young professionals, a couple of graduate students, all quiet and respectful. Then there's the HOA secretary. She's been living here for 5 years and clearly sees herself as the unofficial mayor of our little building. From day one, she made it obvious that she takes her HOA duties very seriously, maybe a little too seriously. I'm not exactly what you'd picture when you think landlord. I'm 28, I dress like I never left college, hoodies and jeans, band t-shirts, the works. I keep to myself, don't make a big deal about owning the place. Most tenants probably assume I'm just another renter like them. The HOA secretary definitely made that assumption. And over the past few months, she's left me a steady stream of passive-aggressive notes about various violations. Apparently, my Black Sabbath welcome mat was inappropriate for a professional building. I left a delivery box outside my door for 2 hours once while I was in a video call and got a printed notice about cluttering common areas. I always just rolled my eyes and ignored her notes. I figured it wasn't worth causing drama over petty stuff. I had no idea she was just getting warmed up. The project that started everything. A few weeks ago, I decided to finally tackle a project I'd been planning for months. I'm pretty handy with woodworking, and I wanted to build a custom bookshelf and desk setup for my home office. Nothing too crazy, just some built-in furniture that would make better use of the space. I ordered some beautiful oak lumber and planned to do all the work on weekends between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Completely reasonable hours, well within city noise ordinances, and obviously all inside my own apartment. The problems started the moment my friend helped me carry the wood upstairs. I noticed the HOA secretary watching from her doorway, and the look on her face was not friendly. She had this expression like she'd caught me smuggling contraband. I didn't think much of it at first, but that evening I got an email that made my jaw drop, the declaration of war. The subject line was official HOA notice of violation, immediate cease and desist required. It was addressed to my tenant email and copied the other 2 board members. The email was a masterpiece of condescending bureaucracy. She cited multiple bylaws about unauthorized modifications, potential noise disturbances, and improper use of common areas for transporting materials. The whole thing dripped with this tone like she was disciplining a child. The best part was the demand that I immediately cease all construction activities or face fines and eviction proceedings for building furniture in my own apartment. I read that email twice. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She had just declared war, but she had no idea who she was fighting, trying to keep the peace. My first instinct was to just tell her I owned the building and end this nonsense. But something made me pause. Maybe it was curiosity about how far she'd take this power trip. Maybe I just wanted to see if she'd figure it out on her own. I sent back a polite reply explaining that I wasn't doing construction, just assembling furniture inside my unit. I mentioned that all my work would be during reasonable hours and within noise ordinances. I kept my tone friendly and didn't reveal my ownership. That was apparently the wrong approach. The next day, she was waiting for me in the hallway when I came back from the hardware store. She had clearly been watching for me through her peephole. She launched into this theatrical performance about how she wasn't stupid, she knew construction when she saw it. She kept going on about how the owner would be horrified to know a tenant was treating his property this way. The irony was painful. I tried to stay calm and explain again that it was just a personal project. That's when she really lost it. She started yelling about being on the HOA board and how she wouldn't tolerate noise and dust throughout the building. Then came the threat that sealed her fate. She was going to contact the owner right now and have me evicted. I just nodded and went into my apartment. Part of me wanted to tell her right then, but I was curious to see how much deeper she'd dig this hole. The emergency meeting. 2 days later, I got an email notification about an emergency HOA board meeting. Since I'm technically the building owner, I'm on the official HOA mailing list, even though the secretary doesn't know that. The meeting agenda was all about addressing unauthorized tenant activities and implementing stronger oversight procedures. I decided not to attend. I wanted to see exactly what she had planned. The next morning, there were new notices posted on every apartment door. The HOA had passed a series of new rules that were clearly designed to target my project specifically. First, there was the delivery rule. All deliveries of items larger than a carry-on suitcase had to be registered with the HOA board at least 72 hours in advance using something called the Large Item Delivery Form. Then there was the rooftop rule. The patio was no longer open access. It had to be reserved 48 hours in advance, and gatherings of more than 2 people were strictly prohibited. The best one was the tool rule. No power tools of any kind could be used on weekends, regardless of city noise ordinances. On my copy of the notice, she had added a handwritten note at the bottom. Thought you could ignore the rules. Think again. That's when my patience finally ran out. It wasn't anger exactly, more like cold, calculated resolve. She had given me a new set of rules to follow, and I was going to follow them to the absolute, inconvenient, and glorious letter. Malicious compliance begins. I started with the delivery rule. My project required dozens of small items, screws, sandpaper, wood stain, brushes, all sorts of stuff. Instead of ordering everything at once like a normal person, I began placing individual orders for each item, then I started sending the required forms. Request for approval for 1 box of 2-inch wood screws, Phillips head, zinc plated, an hour later. Request for approval for 1 can of wood stain, 8 ounces, early American oak finish, another hour. Request for approval for 1 package of 220 grit sandpaper, 5 sheets. I sent dozens of these emails over the course of 2 days, each one meticulously filled out on their precious form, each one a separate request requiring board approval. I was following their rules exactly as written. The HOA secretary's responses got shorter and more irritated with each approval email she had to send back. By the end of the second day, she was just sending one-word replies. Approved. Fine. Whatever. But that was just the warm-up act. The owner emerges. While I was flooding their inboxes with delivery forms, I was preparing the main event. See, I'd been communicating with the HOA board through my tenant email address, but I also had another email address, the official one for my property management company. Time to introduce them to the real landlord. I drafted a formal notice from my ownership company email and sent it to the entire HOA board, including our friend the secretary. The subject line was, Mandatory Building Improvements and Safety Inspections, Immediate Implementation. The email was written in proper legal language, the kind that makes landlords sound official and serious. It informed the board that, as the property owner, I would be undertaking several mandatory capital improvements and safety inspections, effective immediately. First on the list was a comprehensive fire door inspection. Every single unit's front door needed to be examined to ensure it met current fire codes. This would require scheduled access to every apartment, including the secretary's. Second, the rooftop patio would be completely closed for 2 to 3 weeks for essential waterproofing and resurfacing. This directly contradicted her new reservation system. Third, the entire building's hallway lighting system would be upgraded to energy-efficient LEDs. This would require electricians working in the hallways from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday for 2 full weeks. Far more noise and disruption than my little woodworking project could ever cause. I sent that email on a Thursday evening and waited. The realization. Friday morning, I was having coffee when I heard frantic knocking on my door. Through the peephole, I could see the HOA secretary standing there with a printed email in her hand, looking like she'd seen a ghost. I opened the door and she just stared at me for a long moment. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You're the owner?" she finally managed to whisper. I smiled pleasantly and confirmed that yes, I was indeed the building owner. I thanked her for her diligent management of the common areas and mentioned that her new delivery form was very thorough. I'd approved all of my own requests, by the way. Then I brought up the inspection schedule. I could do her unit on Wednesday at 10 a.m. if that worked for her. She tried to stammer out some kind of explanation, but I just handed her an official inspection notice and suggested she review her lease agreement before our meeting. The look on her face was priceless. The inspection Wednesday came around and I arrived at her apartment with a licensed contractor I'd hired for the building inspection. The secretary answered the door looking like she hadn't slept in days. What we found during that inspection was interesting. Very interesting. She had installed an unauthorized dishwasher without proper permits or plumbing modifications. The hardwood floors had significant scratches and gouges from her furniture that she'd never reported or offered to repair. Most damning of all, she had a window air conditioning unit that violated both building rules and city ordinances. I documented everything carefully and professionally. After all, I was conducting an official inspection as the landlord, the final move. The next day, the secretary received a formal notice to cure or quit from my property management company. She had 30 days to pay for the floor damages, remove the unauthorized appliances, and bring her unit into compliance with her lease agreement. Failure to comply would result in eviction proceedings. The other HOA board members, who had been mostly passive observers in this whole drama, quickly distanced themselves from her. They were embarrassed by the situation and eager to avoid any further conflict with the building owner. They readily agreed to my suggestion that we roll back all the new rules and return to the previous, more reasonable policies. The aftermath. The secretary lasted exactly 2 weeks before she broke her lease and moved out. I guess the thought of paying thousands in damages while living next door to the landlord she'd tried to bully was too much for her. She didn't even try to fight the charges. She just packed up and left, muttering something about finding a building with more professional management. The other tenants were actually relieved when she left. Turns out she'd been bothering everyone with her petty complaints and power trips, not just me. A few people even thanked me for handling the situation professionally. The peaceful resolution. With the self-appointed building dictator gone, life returned to normal pretty quickly. I finished my beautiful bookshelf project without any further drama. The rooftop patio reopened after its renovation, which actually did include some nice improvements I'd been planning anyway. We got a new HOA board member, a quiet graduate student who actually understands that the job is about maintaining common areas, not micromanaging everyone's lives. The delivery form requirement was quietly abandoned. The tool restrictions were lifted. The rooftop went back to being a shared space where people could actually enjoy themselves. Most importantly, I learned a valuable lesson about assuming people know who's really in charge. Looking back, in the end, the secretary's thirst for control was her complete undoing. She tried to build her own little kingdom in my hallway, but she forgot to check who actually owned the castle. I never set out to be a vindictive landlord. I just wanted to build some furniture and mind my own business. But when someone tries to use fake authority to push you around, sometimes you have to remind them how real authority actually works. The funniest part is that if she just knocked on my door and politely asked about the noise, I would have been happy to work around her schedule. A simple conversation could have avoided this entire mess. Instead, she chose to go nuclear over some lumber and a few power tools. She filed false violations, created unnecessary rules, and threatened eviction, all because she assumed she could intimidate someone she thought was just another tenant. Some people learn the hard way that you should never start a fight unless you're absolutely sure you're the one holding all the cards. These days, I'm much more upfront about being the building owner when I meet new tenants, not in an intimidating way, just so everyone knows where they stand. It prevents misunderstandings and keeps the peace. My building runs smoothly now. People are respectful of the common areas without needing a dozen petty rules to enforce basic decency. The rooftop patio gets used regularly for small gatherings and quiet relaxation. And my custom bookshelf turned out absolutely beautiful. Every time I look at it, I remember the satisfaction of watching someone's power trip collapse under the weight of their own assumptions. The moral of the story is simple. Sometimes the person you're trying to boss around is the person who signs your lease. And sometimes that person has been letting you think you're in charge just to see how far you'll take it. When you're building tiny kingdoms, always make sure you know who owns the land. Update: the plot thickens. Well, I thought that story was over, but apparently the universe had other plans. About 3 months after the secretary moved out, I got some very interesting information that made the whole situation even more satisfying. The real story comes out. One of my long-term tenants, an older gentleman who lives on the second floor, came to me with something he thought I should know. He'd been friends with the previous building owner and had some insider knowledge about why the secretary had been so aggressive about her HOA position. Turns out she'd been planning a hostile takeover. According to my tenant, the secretary had been in contact with a property investment company for over a year. Her plan was to gradually make life so difficult for tenants that they'd move out, then convince the HOA board to impose such strict rules that the building would become undesirable and lose value. The investment company was supposedly going to swoop in with a lowball offer to buy the building from the struggling owner. Once they owned it, they planned to gut renovate all the units and convert them to luxury rentals at triple the current rent. The secretary was going to get a finder's fee and a guaranteed property management position if the plan worked. The evidence. My tenant had kept copies of emails the secretary had accidentally CC'd him on early in her scheme. She'd been documenting every minor complaint about tenants, every maintenance issue, every possible negative aspect of building management she could find. She was literally building a case to present to potential buyers about what a problem property this was. Reading through those emails was surreal. She'd been manufacturing drama and exaggerating problems for months, all while pretending to be a concerned tenant looking out for everyone's best interests. The investment company had even done a preliminary assessment of the building last year, walking through the common areas while she gave them a tour and pointed out every minor flaw she could find. The legal consultation. I took all this information to a lawyer just to understand my options. What the secretary had been doing was definitely unethical, and possibly illegal depending on how you interpreted tenant fraud laws. But here's the beautiful part. By the time I bought the building, her entire scheme had already failed spectacularly. The previous owner had sold to me at a fair market price because he was ready to retire, not because he was struggling with a problem property. All her manufactured complaints and fake violations had been for nothing. She'd spent over a year making everyone's life miserable for a plan that was already dead in the water. The investment company. Out of curiosity, I looked up the investment company she'd been working with. Turns out they'd been shut down by the state for running similar scams in other cities. They'd bilk property owners into selling cheap, then flip buildings into overpriced luxury units using questionable renovation practices. The secretary had unknowingly been working with criminals who were probably never going to pay her even if their plan had succeeded. The new information spreads word got around to the other former HOA board members about what had really been going on. They were absolutely furious. They'd been manipulated into passing ridiculous rules and making enemies with tenants, all to serve her secret agenda. One of them actually apologized to me personally for not questioning her motives more carefully. He said he'd always thought some of her suggestions were excessive, but she was so insistent about maintaining standards that he'd gone along with it. When the other tenants found out what she'd really been up to, the reaction was swift and harsh. Several people started sharing stories about times she tried to get them to complain about building management or encourage them to consider moving to better-maintained properties. The graduate student who'd replaced her on the HOA board did some research and found that our building actually has one of the lowest turnover rates in the neighborhood. We have happy, long-term tenants who take care of their units and respect the shared spaces. Everything she'd been telling the investment company about this being a problem property was completely fabricated. The final twist. Here's the most satisfying part of this whole update. Remember how I mentioned she never fought the charges for her lease violations? I always thought that was weird, since she seemed like the type to dispute everything. Turns out she was planning to use those violations as more evidence for her investors about how the building was falling apart under poor management. She was going to claim the landlord was unfairly targeting tenants with made-up violations. But when she discovered I actually was the landlord, her whole narrative collapsed. She couldn't claim the owner was incompetent or absent when I was literally living in the building and handling everything personally. She couldn't use fake violations as evidence of poor management when they were legitimate lease breaches that she'd been hiding for years. Her entire exit strategy evaporated the moment she realized who she'd been trying to manipulate. The building today. 6 months later, I can honestly say this is the most peaceful and well-managed building I could have asked for. The HOA board actually functions the way it's supposed to, handling common area maintenance and organizing the occasional building-wide event. We had a rooftop barbecue last month that almost every tenant attended. People brought food to share and everyone just enjoyed the evening together. It was exactly the kind of community atmosphere I'd hoped for when I bought the place. The new HOA board member has been fantastic. She actually has useful suggestions for improvements and understands that rules should serve the community, not control it. Several of my tenants have told me they've never lived in a more pleasant building. People hold doors for each other, keep the common areas clean without being asked, and generally treat the place like a home rather than just a rental. The real estate market. The neighborhood has actually gone up in value since I bought the building, which makes the secretary's whole scheme even more ridiculous. She was trying to convince investors that this was a declining area when it's actually one of the most desirable parts of the city for young professionals. I've had real estate agents contact me multiple times asking if I'm interested in selling. The offers have been significantly higher than what I paid, but I'm not going anywhere. This building is exactly what I wanted, and now I know I can handle whatever challenges come with property ownership. Lessons learned. This whole experience taught me some valuable lessons about reading people's motivations. The secretary wasn't just a power-hungry busybody, though she was definitely that too. She was running a long-term con that required her to create chaos and dissatisfaction. Every petty rule, every aggressive confrontation, every attempt to make tenants miserable was part of a calculated strategy to devalue the property for her own benefit. It makes me wonder how many other difficult tenants in other buildings might actually be working some kind of angle rather than just being naturally unpleasant. The woodworking project, and since people ask, the bookshelf and desk setup turned out absolutely perfect. I've gotten so many compliments from visitors that I'm thinking about taking on woodworking projects for other people as a side business. The irony is that the project she tried so hard to stop ended up being one of the best improvements I've made to my apartment. Every time I sit at that custom desk, I remember how satisfying it was to watch her realize that all her scheming and manipulation had been pointless. Moving forward. I'm more careful now about vetting potential tenants, not just for their ability to pay rent, but for any signs that they might have ulterior motives. I ask more questions about why they're moving and what they're looking for in a building. I've also become more active in the local property owners association. Sharing stories like this helps other small landlords recognize and avoid similar scams. The building is fully occupied with a waiting list, which tells me I'm doing something right. Word is spread that this is a well-managed property with reasonable rules and responsive ownership. Final thoughts. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd revealed my identity right away when she first started causing problems. Would she have backed down and tried a different approach? Would she have moved out immediately to avoid getting caught? But honestly, I'm glad things played out the way they did. Her assumption that I was just another tenant gave me the perfect opportunity to see exactly what she was capable of. If I'd stopped her early, I never would have discovered the full extent of her deception. Plus, the malicious compliance with those delivery forms was genuinely fun. I still have screenshots of all those ridiculous approval requests saved on my phone. Sometimes when I'm having a bad day, I scroll through them and remember how frustrated she must have been trying to process dozens of individual emails about wood screws and sandpaper. The whole experience reinforced something I've always believed about dealing with bullies and con artists. Give them enough rope and they'll usually hang themselves. The secretary's need to control and manipulate ultimately exposed her true agenda and led to her downfall. She thought she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Turns out she was just playing herself. The end. So that's the real end of the story. What started as a simple case of an entitled tenant trying to boss around her landlord turned out to be a much more complex scheme involving property fraud and investment scams. Justice was served not just through eviction, but through the complete collapse of a year-long criminal conspiracy. The secretary didn't just lose her apartment, she lost her entire illegal side business. And me? I got a beautiful custom bookshelf, a well-managed building, and one hell of a story to tell at parties. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well and letting your enemies destroy themselves. The next one is a pro-revenge story. This incident blew up in March 2021, in the middle of lockdowns and stuff. It would probably be recognizable to people I work with. Hopefully they don't read this thread, haha. It's a story about someone whose ambition was bigger than their ethics and the law, and it coming back to bite them. It's a bit long, sorry. TLDR at the bottom. At the time, I was working as a manager in a mid-sized business. While I was there, I was assigned a new member to my team. I'll call her Evil. Evil was in her mid-20s and was pretty fresh out of college. She was the kind of person who could talk your ear off about all of her ideas and plans and what she was working on, but never really seemed to have anything to show for it. When I talked to her about clients complaining that she wasn't getting back to them, she would always have an excuse about how difficult they were, how snowed under she was, and how she had written an email, but it must have gotten lost in spam. So on and so forth. Basically, never her fault. It got to the point where after one of our monthly meetings, I called her in and explained that if she couldn't get her tasks done, she needed to let us know so we could help delegate resources to make sure things weren't slipping through the cracks. I'll admit I was pretty direct. Her performance was impacting the whole team, and my job was literally to keep the team on track. I get that people can be under pressure, that there can be stuff going on at home which impacts work, and that sometimes people need a bit of help. But if every time I ask about a project you say, yep, everything's good, I've got it under control, and then it all falls apart and your only response is to blame the client, we have a problem. I explained that I wasn't going to start formal performance management or anything like that, but from now on I'd like her to check in with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to go over objectives for the week and to check if she needed support with any of her clients. I know it isn't fun to be micromanaged, so I tried to keep these check-ins short and mostly just offer assistance on stuff. She clearly hated my guts, though, and apparently was hatching her own pro-revenge. Now part of my role included use of a purchasing card, which wasn't in my name but I had access to. I was given the card to basically make small purchases for the office or spend up to $500 on clients. The card was kept in an office I shared with another team manager, where we both could access it when we needed it. One day I get a call from accounts asking about a few abnormal purchases on the card. A Photoshop subscription, a couple of Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription, etc. I say I don't know anything about them, and they should check with the other team manager. Apparently the other team manager didn't know anything about them either, because after the weekend I get called into the big boss's office. After my colleague and I had denied involvement, accounts had started calling Adobe and Uber and stuff to find out where the transactions were coming from. They said that not only were the accounts in my name, they were registered to an email address with my name in it too. E.g. word, roll3@domain.com or something. I can't describe what it felt like to be in that meeting. I felt physically sick. I couldn't work out what was happening. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was about to get fired, and I couldn't understand how that was even possible. The director was going on about how access to the card was a privilege, and that I had signed an agreement about appropriate use, and so on and so forth. I denied that I had been using it inappropriately, and the boss listened, but I could tell he wasn't that convinced. To be honest, in my head I was gaslighting myself and worrying that I had somehow saved the card in Google, and maybe my wife had been accidentally using it or something. It was terrible, and I found myself apologizing and saying, I don't know how this happened. I assure you that I know that none of those expenses are appropriate uses of company funds. There must have been some kind of mistake. Can I please have the details and look into it? Etc., etc. When I finally got out of that office, job and still intact, barely, Evil was waiting for me at my office door. She was grinning from ear to ear and sweetly explained she had been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd do the meeting tomorrow, and she said, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" Confused, because I didn't know I was in a pro-revenge thread at the time, I just replied, "Yes, why would I not be in tomorrow?" And she just sipped her tea and said, "Oh, no reason," turned around and went back to her desk. Something felt off, but I was still worrying about what had happened with the boss, so I spent the next couple of hours calling my wife, calling Adobe, and doing the same legwork that accounts had done. It became very obvious that someone had been using my name and the company card to spend a bunch of money online. Had I been hacked or something? Personal info on the dark web, and these hackers just really wanted Photoshop and Wendy's delivered? It was the Uber Eats that was her undoing. After getting on the phone and talking through what had gone on, and obviously giving my name for the account and everything, the fellow on the phone told me where the food had been delivered. It was in our city, which made me rule out straight away any notion of my data being sold online or something. Now I was suspicious and pissed. I don't like to think the worst of people, but now I was. Listening to my gut, I pulled up Evil's employee information and checked her address. I pulled it up on Google Maps, dropped a pin on her place, and then looked for the address Uber Eats had given me. It was the corner of her effing block. I was furious. When she left work for the day, I got it to give me access to her laptop. Sure enough, when I opened up her domainquote.com account under her listed accounts was word, roll3@domain.com. There were some things she had been smart about. The IP address she had been using was the office, which would have tied back to me. She had even had the food delivered to a different address. She had even made a fake email address. But saving her passwords on a work computer was a mistake. I called the boss that night and explained what I had found and kept the IT guy with me to support the fact that I hadn't just logged into her computer and made it all up. The next day, the boss called her into the office and fired her so bad there were red trucks lining up outside the building. When she teary-eyed left his office, I made sure I was standing in the hall sipping a cup of tea. It had gotten cold while I waited for her, but still tasted sweet. I hope she went home that night, because if she did, she would have received some nice goodbye Wendy's delivered by Uber Eats. Paid for on my personal card, of course. Revenge and justice can be the same thing, right? In the end, she was fired. The boss apologized, and we were on good terms when I left in October for a new gig. She never apologized, and I haven't seen her since. The boss decided not to get police involved, and neither did I. Just didn't want the hassle. The next one is an entitled people story lately. I have been going through some purge in my life. My 2 childhood best friends started changing the way they treat me when my business started taking off. And oh, not just them. Even their families, who used to be so nice to me when I was nothing, started being different. All three of us were so close as kids. We shared dreams and ambitions because we all came from poor families. Me being the poorest because we live in the slums. There are days, actually, that their goals, plans, and dreams are bigger than mine, and I say, wow. I cheer on them. Me, I will just try my best to get out of this poverty. I just know I have that strong will. Fast forward to adulthood. In our early 20s, one of us started a small business. Let's call him A, because he did not finish college, and me and the other one, let's call him B, went into corporate. I was so happy for A, I even started promoting his business, finding a way how he can increase more sales. I loved helping him. His business went booming for a year or two, but after that, it's not doing good anymore. It's still trying to survive up until this day, though. But during those times, A's business started becoming weak. I was not there. I disappeared. Both A and B did not check on me. I was actually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. But when I am okay, I will just come back like nothing happened, even if I was a danger for myself. But they did not ask me what happened. It's okay. I know they both have things going on too, and I do not want to burden them. As time goes by, I learned how to get out of the matrix and also got married to a very amazing and supportive man. Was able to start a business because of his motivation and helps me around. We are doing amazing. A and B started seeing these progress and they started changing. When we go out and hang out before we chip in, but it went to me now paying the whole bill. I started hearing joking side comments from A. That is fine. Won't hurt you cause you are rich now. I just did not mind it cause he is just like that sometimes. Then, there came a time that A started borrowing money from me. But unfortunately, he never paid back, but tries to live a rich and famous lifestyle even if his business is not doing well. Tried several times being understanding and giving him some grace, but I really got pissed off. Now I cut him off. Next here comes B. This is the most hurtful one because I never thought he would be like A. Little by little, I started feeling like a bank for him and his family who were so nice to me when we were kids. They always ask and borrow money for me, but the difference is yes, they pay on time, but they only remember me when they need money. They were not like that before. I used to give their family presents and gifts for holidays and birthdays because I am really thankful for them being nice to me when I was nothing but last week. I was not able to send some greeting and gift to B's mom. This is because I am actually 7 months pregnant now, and I got so caught up preparing for my baby. We are also building a house, so lots of things going on. This is the first year I failed. Since I was busy, I did not lend B money too for his mom's birthday celebration. But I think his mom took this negatively. I posted my baby's first ultrasound in my day, FB, before she used to heart my days, but yesterday she did not. I tried reaching out to her to talk, but she did not answer anymore. It just hurts. Money indeed changes people, and most of the time people does not want to see you succeeding anyway. Thank you for watching.